to ask him a question, you flip it over and you can see his ambiguous response to your question. One interesting thing was that Lionel set right there. That was a giveaway to Lionel dealers, and in 1977. And you can barely see it, but there's an R2D2 right inside the door in there, and it says "Season Greetings." And those are really tough. Most people don't even know about that, but it's an interesting little train, and it fits in there. There was never a Star Wars train, but it was. These are neat outdoor toys. Most people didn't even know this was around the Scout Walker Command Tower, and it was like, the top looked like an AT-ST head, and it had a speeder bike as the swing.
The most awesome playset ever.
It was really awesome.
And that on the right there we have, it was a speeder bike ride-on toy, like a little bike, and it was a prize as a giveaway. So these are really hard to come by because they weren't available for purchase. You had to fill out your sweepstakes form and send it in. So here's some electronic games. The X-Wing Aces on the top was a recycled game from another Kenner toy. They did that a lot. And then the two other theirs are just some electronics games. I couldn't even explain to you how they played because they're, by today's standards, they're really crazy.
Yeah, board games.
There were quite a few board games.
Film games were interesting. These little movie viewers were cool. They had a little piece of 8mm film as a continuous loop, and you made sure you had a light source from the top, and you just cranked it. You play the film sequences backwards and forwards, and after a while they got all scarred up, so it looked bad as you went through it. And they sold different different cartridges to replace in there. And then there was the Give a Show projector, which was something that Kenner was using over and over in different lines, and it was just a little slideshow. They were doing a vintage slideshow, kind of like
And
this one.
I don't know if the U.S. version, but the international version of the Give a Show, the slides are just crazy. They make no sense. You'd be like, this isn't even the same movie.
We threw model kits in here. There were snap together model kits, glued together model kits. This is just a sampling here. Play-Doh was very popular. That was one of Kenner's backbone items. And they made play sets for Star Wars Empire, Jedi, all the way down to the Ewoks sets. So there was multiple sets to get there.
And they had a whole preschool line of figures near the end there for, the younger crowd. And these were just little unarticulated figures about, yay big. Kind of cute, but, and again, reused there the Give a Show projector once again. And here's some more preschool, a sit and spin. Yeah, everybody's going to be out looking for that in the exhibit room, right?
Real quick, the sit and spin's interesting because we were told that by a few people that the president of Kenner, he hated that toy. He told them that will not show up. But everybody knew that would be awesome. So they snuck it in to Toy Fair, and it went over like gangbusters. And then the guy was taking credit that, it was his idea that they sold that. But kids want to spin themselves silly, and they've sold this in different colors, different stickers for all kinds of lines, and they still sell sit and spins.
There's a telephone there and a clock. Okay, worldwide.
Yeah, so worldwide, I wanted to touch on this since vintage doesn't stop at the borders here in the U.S. There was multiple licensees, as you can see there. There's some packaging. Actually, let's go back one. I'll go with some of the packaging, like you have Kenner, you have Harbert in Italy, PVP in Spain, you have Clipper, which was in the Netherlands, Bassa in Peru, Lulileti in Mexico, Top Toys in Argentina. The M is Meccano, which was France. Irwin Toys was a distributor Canada. Parker Toys was who sold the toys in Germany. At the top again, Palitoy in the UK, Toll Toys in Australia. Glasslight was in Brazil. Then had the bottom, Takara, Poppy, and Sakuda. All three Japanese, and Poppy was a division of Bandai, I believe. So Japan's got some really interesting stuff. It's just a sample of the action figures. A lot of them were very similar. There are some variations of the figures themselves, but the packaging is interesting to see the logo in different languages.
Probably the coolest one is the one on the top right there. That's the Meccano one from France, and they came with this card that was almost square rather than the taller version that is typical even to today. And it's kind of a neat packaging variation. Really hard to come by. Some of the Meccanos. The Jawas really easy.
Yeah, some more stuff in here. Just a smattering to show you some interesting ones here. The lower right, the Jedi figures with the coin on the Sakuda figures. That a coin they shrink wrapped it on there, sort of like a cobbled together Power of the Force look, but there was a sticker on the back, Return of the Jedi. Those are exceedingly rare. At the top, the walking R2-D2, which was originally sold in Japan. It's a wind-up. It was sold in Canada. And then the packaging over there on the right-hand side, the blank cover is a Canadian special. They had multi-packs of figures, and they had one extra figure in each pack, and that was in this shrink-wrap packaging. And this one, they changed the names a little bit. AT-AT Commander was called General Veers in this line. They had like six figures.
Yeah, those are really hard to come by. And the bottom left there is probably the last line of action figures for vintage in the world, which is the Brazilian line in that packaging.
So Japan probably had the most interesting figures that were exclusive to their country, and we just want to put some of these together. There was a radio, there was a lightsaber with color change discs in it, which was a neat idea. Some really interesting ones was 8-inch figures in the middle. There was 4 figures, and then you had a series of 5 die-cast ships. Most of these are Takara. That R2 was like missile firing, or it had a slide. They made multiple kinds of R2s.
Yeah, here's the missile firing one
Missile
there.
firing R2. You had Darth Vader fired a missile out of his chest.
C-3PO fired a missile out of his chest. The Japanese missile firings out of chest.
Fighting Godzilla and stomping down through Tokyo. But some interesting ones, the bump and go R2. The top was the R2 with like a slide that showed like project like images on the wall, and some interesting ones like they had this sort of plastic and die-cast X-wing, and they had an X-wing that was transforming. That's on the lower left, and you can tweak it into different shapes. And then I guess Hasbro is making all kinds of transforming things now. Plastic figures in a bag made by Maruka, and model kits. They had wooden snap-together model kits or puzzles. Bot bags and beach balls. Right in the middle, the kid's throwing that blimp. That's like an inflatable X-wing, but it's just a giant blimp.
Yes, another toy that makes no sense.
Yeah. So these are really interesting figures. Mexico, Lily Ledy released this series of 7 12-inch action figures, and they were all different. They were all really hokey looking. The packaging is pretty much the same, with different printing of the characters on the front. But Tusken Raider and Jawa were sort of exclusive to that. R2-D2 is interesting. It basically took an R2-D2 action figure and scaled them up in tooling. These are really sought after by collectors. Hard to find them in good shape, but they're really neat. And they're really, Han Solo's got like a pirate pistol tucked into his belt. And Luke's got that giant bat lightsaber. So it's really neat. Darth Vader's got a sticker on his chest. So they're really fun, but they're really hard to find and interesting.
Here's some stuff from Canada, especially in the middle is really interesting. They just sort of took these random toys that they had, a plastic gun, a belt, and they slapped Star Wars on it, called it a utility belt, and released these in Canada. And these weren't out for very long before Lucasfilm found out about them and didn't really think they were up to the quality standard of what they wanted. So those 3 toys were not available for very long, really hard to find.
Yeah, they like I mentioned before, that walking R2-D2 was only sold on the card in Canada. Yak Face in the packaging. This is Power of the Force has got French writing on it. That was Canadian.
Yeah, there is no English-only version of that figure.
Right, so it wasn't sold in the U.S. And then they had their own version of the plush Chewbacca. You can see over there, it's the Canadian version on the left. In the double pair, and then the U.S. version, and then they also had like a big store display Chewbacca, which is really impressive. It's actually about twice the height of a regular Chewbacca, and then they had the plush Jawa, which was always a favorite. And one not many people have seen is the Chewbacca hand puppet. It's really funky looking, but that's down there, lower left, and it's basically this big mouth. It's like a jabbering puppet. That's what it reminded me of. It's really neat, just a big fur ball, basically.
So in England, Palitoy was the license, and probably one of the most interesting toys they had over there that was never in the U.S. was on the top right there, this Death Star. It was a cardboard thing. You piece it together, and it was just a really kind of a cool piece that wasn't available in the U.S. whatsoever. Yeah, it was their version. And it's all cardboard, but it's interesting. It's got levels in different areas and different play environments. It's got a pseudo trash compactor in there. It's really neat.
And they were trying. They couldn't sell the same toys as in the U.S. They couldn't. They were too expensive. So they had these vac form cheap bases. And they recycled the Cantina, the Land of the Jawas, and there was two versions actually of the Droid Factory, two different colored bases, but they were real cheap vac form plastic bases because they needed a lower price point toy. But those were specific to there. There was a talking R2D too. So
It's interesting, especially early in the line, a lot of the packaging was very different. As you get later and later in the line, a lot of it becomes just the tri-logo standardized and looks kind of similar.
And their land speeder, their X-Wing had no, the land speeder didn't have an opening hood, and the X-Wing had
No LED on it.
LED. It was just a way to cheapen up the toy. And this is just examples of European stuff. Those sets on the right-hand side are pretty interesting. The Power of the Force logo is in 3 languages, Ewok Combat Chase, and a Hoth Rescue set, basically repackaging just some toys. So the toys you see on the front, that's what they were crammed in there. They had tri-logo carded figures folded and crammed into those, and it was just those are just packaging things to collect. The Rancor monster was interesting. Put this in there. It's just in a long box. The Rancor monster was, for whatever reason, was packed with his arms up, and I guess so they could get more logo on there. So that's why it's a really impressive box, but really it's only.
On the top left there, you see the tri-logo packaging, which by the time the Jedi figures were going out, that was the packaging you got on everything. So unlike you saw earlier, all the random packaging from all over the world on some of the Star Wars Empire stuff, by Jedi's time, it was pretty standardized.
Yeah, they had the multi-pack. There was an Italian thing. Basically, it was 4 tri-logo figures with this cardboard sleeve stapled on the top. It's interesting though. KB Toys actually ended up with a lot of tri-logo figures, and it's funny because Yak Face was never really officially released in the U.S., but that Yak Face has a prominent, £1.59 sticker on it, but there's a $1.99 KB sticker in the corner, so they sold those. I know a collector who's carried on to his adulthood. He found those Yak Faces and he knew they were special when he was a kid, and he went around to every KB and bought those things up. So they did sell those in the U.S. in that packaging, just at the end of the line. Australia, they had their own unique. They had their version of the cardboard Death Star. The graphic on the bottom was different. They had their own version of a coin offer. You can see that Greedo with the yellow sticker, but some, I guess, more interesting things they had was they had their own version of the vinyl cape Jawa. It was on Empire packaging. It's a darker cape. It's almost like Ben Kenobi color. There's only a few of those known in the carton that are still packaged, but there are loose ones around. Some of the loose ones tend to be spotting, and there's some questioning as can you tell if it's one because it's spotted or not. But they had their own version of that. It's hard to buy a loose one now with the Ben Kenobi color cape because usually it's a fake one. And some of the really impressive ones are the Power of the Force figures. Those were just recycled earlier figures, but this Power of the Force packaging was only available in Australia.
And oddly enough, the Gamorrean Guard has the right coin, but the other two, I believe, it's a Warrock coin for some reason. So. And
then a little bit here and there, I don't know how many are around, but the Vader was actually released in that Empire Strikes Back packaging, the 12-inch Vader in Australia.
And that's exceedingly rare too.
Germany, there's nothing really new here. Those multi-packs are interesting. Those sleeves are bigger. It's basically those 3 figures with this big sleeve around it, still tri-logo figures, and then you had figures with mini rigs. And for a more interesting one, this Eeps comic that came out, they had a Hoth Stormtrooper on the cover, and and it came packaged with a